Hi, Stephen from Infinity Science Center, and today we're going to take a look at 5 inventions from World War II that still affect us here in the 21st century. World War II was actually the most destructive conflict that the world has ever seen, and today we're taking a look at technology from that war that made it into the civilian market. You know, there's a saying, necessity is the mother of invention, and this couldn't have been more true for the men and women who fought in World War II, which ended 80 years ago. Did you know that the microwave oven in your kitchen actually has its roots in radar technology from World War II? Now, radar, or radio detection and ranging, has actually been around since the 1930s, but World War II led to its widespread use and adoption around the world. Nowadays, we use radar to track everything from commercial airliners to the weather. Well, what's that got to do with the microwave oven on my kitchen counter? Well, we can thank this guy, Percy Spencer. Mr. Spencer was an engineer at Raytheon during the war, and one day he was standing next to one of these, a cavity magnetron, which was used in radar equipment during and after the war. But you see, a cavity magnetron actually releases a lot of microwave radiation, so gotta love those 1940 safety guidelines. Anyway, Percy realized that his candy bar had melted after standing next to the magnetron. So he had someone bring him a bag of popcorn. They waited a few minutes, and well, the kernel started popping. There's also a story that they tried cooking an egg that was still in the shell, but according to the story, well, that worked out like you would expect it. In 1946, Raytheon started selling the radar range to commercial kitchens that were about 6 feet tall, really heavy, and water-cooled. The consumer models that you can find in houses today weren't actually available until the late 1960s, and if I'm remembering correctly, my family didn't get one until the 1980s. Anyway, over 90% of American households have a microwave oven today. Originally, a computer, as we understand it, could and often would take up an entire room. Nowadays, you can just put one in your pocket. But in the 1940s and even up to the 1960s, a computer usually referred to a person who did complex mathematical calculations needed for, well, a variety of reasons. What does this have to do with the war fought 80 years ago? 2 words. Code breaking. You see, the Germans had 2 of the toughest ciphers in use at the time. One was called Enigma, and you might have heard of that one. The other one was the Lorentz cipher. And at the time, Britain was the country leading the efforts to crack both codes. And there are a lot of fascinating details to that story that I just don't have time to get into in this video. Breaking the Lorentz cipher and decoding it was very tedious and time intensive, and it was being done manually. So there was this idea that if we could mechanize or automate the process, that would greatly improve the speed and efficiency of the code breakers at Britain's Bletchley Park. So what do you call a machine that can read 5,000 characters per second? Well, they called it Colossus. Colossus has been described as the first large-scale electronic digital computer because it could be reprogrammed, but it didn't have any internal memory. And by large scale, well, it filled an entire room. Duct tape. Or is it duct tape? There's a little bit of a debate on the actual name, but it is pretty much everywhere. It's another invention created out of wartime necessity, and this story starts with a concerned mother. The idea for what would be called duct tape was conceived by Miss Vesta Stout back in 1943. Now, like I said, she was a concerned mother of 2 sons that were serving in the U.S. Navy at the time. And also, like many women during the war, she was actually working in a factory in support of the war effort, specifically the Green River Ordnance Plant in Illinois. And of course, at an ordnance plant, they make ammunition. Well, after they make the ammunition, they put the ammunition into boxes. They seal the boxes with a thin paper tape with tabs to open the boxes later. Boxes were then dipped in wax to waterproof them. Problem was that the tabs would often tear off before the ammunition even reached the front lines, which of course makes the boxes hard to open. So that would cost soldiers precious time while they're under fire. So Vesta came up with the idea for a waterproof cloth tape to seal the boxes. And of course, she took this idea to her supervisors, but they kind of rejected it. So on February 10th, 1943, she wrote a letter to President Franklin D. Roosevelt with her idea. I just love the fact she skipped over all the other bosses and wrote directly to the president. Anyway, President Roosevelt liked the idea, who then sent it to the War Production Board, The War Production Board then wrote a letter to Miss Stout to tell her that her idea was approved. The War Production Board then contracted with Industrial Tape Corporation, a division of Johnson & Johnson, to produce the tape. Of course, it wasn't called duct tape back then. It was called 100-mile-per-hour tape because the armed forces found out you can use it to repair your boots. You can even fix a fender on a Jeep with it. And of course, since then, we've been using it around the house and for crafts, and they've even used it in space because duct tape helped to save the lives of the Apollo 13 astronauts. Penicillin is one of the first antibiotic medications, and it's still in use today. It was originally discovered in 1928 by Alexander Fleming. The story goes that he had left some petri dishes on his lab bench instead of in the incubator while he went off on a 2-week holiday, and by the time he came back, some mold had started to grow in the dishes. Well, it turns out that mold had antibacterial properties. So how did it affect World War II? Well, before antibiotics, wounds could and often did become infected, which of course could lead to some very bad outcomes for, well, anyone with an infected wound. Penicillin and the sulfa drugs that came before it helped to treat infected wounds and other bacterial infections. So they figured out how to produce and purify penicillin for use by 1940. The problem was there wasn't a way to mass produce the penicillin, but thanks to a collaboration between Britain and the United States, there were 2.3 million doses available to Allied forces by the time of the D-Day invasion on June 6, 1944. It's been estimated that penicillin reduced deaths from infected wounds by 15%. If you stop to consider the number of soldiers on the battlefield during the war, that's pretty impressive. Well, you didn't think we'd have a video on technology of World War II and leave out rockets, did you? After all, literally our biggest exhibit is the first stage of a Saturn V. You may have heard the name Werner von Braun. He was the head of the V-2 rocket program for Germany. The V-2 was pretty much the first ballistic missile to be used in wartime, and it was put into service in 1944. However, by 1945, von Braun could see the writing on the wall, so to speak, so he made sure to surrender to the Americans and not the Soviets. Through Operation Paperclip, the U.S. brought von Braun, his team, paperwork, and as many V-2s as they could get their hands on into the United States. And of course, after arriving in the United States, the team would work on rockets for the U.S. military. But that would all change with the launch of Sputnik 1 in October of 1957. At that point, the United States found itself in the space race with the Soviet Union that would last until the Apollo 11 moon landing in 1969. Von Braun led the team that designed the Saturn V launch vehicle that was used in the Apollo program. Thanks for joining me for this look at World War II technology that still affects the world here in the 21st century. Technology developed during this time ran the gamut from mundane things like tape to extraordinary things like rockets. Today, I want to encourage you to take a little bit of time to reflect on the legacy of the most impactful years of the 20th century. May we never forget the sacrifices made and the lessons learned from World War II. I'll see y'all in the next video.